Hello, so I am Sabina JASKOT-GILL. I'm curator of photographs at the National Portrait Gallery, and I am here with the brilliant Siân DAVEY to talk about her series Martha, which is currently on display at Richard Saltoun Gallery. I first became acquainted with Siân's work actually when it was exhibited as part of the Taylor Wessing Photographic Portrait Prize at the gallery, at the National Portrait Gallery, and then had the great pleasure of working with Siân on a project called Together, which was exhibited at the National Portrait Gallery in 2017. And we made Siân travel the country, photographing families across the UK. But it culminated in a really beautiful body of work, which actually shares some themes, I think, with Martha, which we'll discuss later today, and which is what we're here to talk about. But before we talk about the series, Siân, I just wanted to ask you to begin with, why you specifically chose to work with photography, because you initially trained as a painter, I believe, and then had a very successful career as a psychotherapist, but you've now taken up photography in earnest, and I just wondered what attracts you, or still attracts you, to the medium.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I've got some kind of memory loss, genuinely, about why the camera. And, I've talked openly about going to see the Louise Bourgeois retrospective at the Tate, and how that was the ignition for me wanting to kind of earnestly make work, and so I left that show really as it felt like a kind of artistic creative transmission, and it was like a bomb dropped inside me when I left, from feeling very little in the show to sitting on the steps of the Tate saying, I've got to make work. And 2 years later, the camera became the vehicle as a way of understanding my internal world and bringing it into form in the way psychotherapy had. But I just, so I have no idea, and I wish I can remember the moment that I decided it was going to be the camera. But the camera almost feels a little bit extraneous. It feels like a transitional object in a way. If that makes sense.
A means to kind of think about,
yeah,
to reflect on your life and your family and your kind of your world, I guess.
Yeah.
But I would be remiss of me as a curator at the Portrait Gallery not to ask you why portraiture specifically you decided to work with, because I mean landscape is a huge part of your work. A lot of the works, the photographs taken outside in outdoor settings, but I mean throughout all your series, portraiture has really been the focus. So I'm interested to know what kind of draws you to that genre, and whether there's portrait projects that have inspired you.
Well, I think I'm still drawn to painting for a start, and I don't look at photography unless I go to a show, exhibition. I don't look online at work. I have to kind of almost see it so I can kind of feel it. But equally, I will go and see sculpture or painting as much as photography. So, and
why
portrait? Because I think portraiture, ever since I was really small, I was observing this world around me. I grew up in a very, very traumatized household, so I became particularly alert to what these people were doing around me, because I was dependent on this very vulnerable family to survive in, actually. And so I began to read people, and I began to sort of also begin to process my world through them. So reading became part of the way I navigate my world, reading people. So it was no surprise to me. Actually, it was just as I was about to make that transition from being a trainee to a working psychotherapist, my tutor said to me, be careful how you look at people. Because what I was doing without realizing it, I was locking on. I lock onto people without even realizing, and I'm just reading and reading and reading. It's like when you look at someone, it's just like this dance between kind of subject, object, and you're moving backwards and forwards, aren't you? That's kind of how it is as you're, you know, navigating their world with yours. And so I'm constantly fascinated how each individual person is vastly different than the next, and how they work. The workings of an individual is endlessly fascinating. And if you can capture that, you know, a whole person's history and who they are in a moment, it's just extraordinary, isn't it, if you can do that?
Absolutely.
Anyway.
And which brings us on to your subject of the series, which is your stepdaughter, Martha. And it was a project that you began when she was 16 years old and kind of lasted for 3 years, marking this kind of period as she transitions from a teenager to a young adult. And it was published as this very beautiful book in 2018, I believe.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So I don't know if you'd like to introduce the series in your own words, Siân.
Well, Martha was a response to really, Martha kind of invited this piece of work in, and she felt overlooked because initially when I picked up the camera, I was very overzealous about it all. You know, it was like it was the green light really, and I just went for it. And Martha was really happily, gamefully allowing me to try her out in different light conditions and different narratives and compositions. And then Alice, because then I gave birth to Alice, and the struggle I had with Alice compelled me to make this piece of work about her, about Alice. And then Martha said, you don't photograph me anymore. And then I had this extraordinary tutor who I sorely miss, David Chandler, and on my MA and my MFA, and he just noticed the quality of contact that Martha had with me in the pictures I was taking. I hadn't noticed that, but because he noticed it, I just thought, well, that's interesting, and I need to run with that.
In terms of the kind of way that she returns your gaze in the photographs.
Yeah, and the quality of contact that she and I had together. And what's interesting about Martha is she has this kind of constant, you know, she's down here now for the next couple of days, and I'm going to go for a swim in the river with her after this, and I'll take pictures with her. And I know that has this in almost intentionality in the way that she works with the camera. And it's almost like she's like a chameleon. You know, she occupies the whole frame, and not everybody can do that. They can't do that, but she can do that. And so she's, you know, there's a kind of layeredness about her that means that each picture can really hold a different narrative and hold the attention of the viewer.
And we'll kind of think about the narrative in a second, but I'm just really interested for you to talk about how you make these photographs, because, you know, it's you and Martha's friends. Yeah. And it's, you know, the pictures seem very kind of effortless, very natural, but they're quite meticulous, you know, in the way that they're composed, in the way that you're using light and color and the technology that you're using, because, you know, you're not just snapping away. It's a, you know, medium format camera with a limited number of exposures, and there is a kind of more of a deliberateness in a sense, I guess, about how you're going about making these works. And I'm just interested in how, you know, the way you photograph impacts the photographs that you end up producing with Martha and with her friends, because it's very different to the kind of photographs that they're used to taking of themselves, which is, you know, very throwaway, ephemeral. There's a much more of a kind of gravitas, I guess, in the photographs that you're taking.
Yeah, I think in particular with Martha, you know, in many ways, with both with Martha and in Alice, I'm learning about photography. And so I just felt I was walking alongside Martha's life and learning about composition and light, and actually learning not to think. I think this has been really important. And actually, in many ways, I'm snapping away because my camera's an automatic. I had no, I had no idea about depth of field. I was just turning the aperture, which I know now was the aperture, but I didn't know then, and turning it till it showed me that it was just enough light. What I was doing through the whole series, and with Alice, because they overlapped, was learning, understanding, just trying to be back where I was taking pictures. Well, I'm learning how to read, aren't I? And I'm learning how to, what's important in my kind of body sense. I'm mapping out in my body what's important in front of me, which is why I don't use very much technology, because it will get in the way of that. And now I know when the light's working. It's like, it's not particularly conceptually driven, but of course it is too. And in terms of, the world is just a stage, isn't it? And if you just keep committing to being on that stage with someone, their life will just present itself in front of you. I don't have to do anything. So I think that's what was really, that was what was happening, because there were developmental processes that she was going through. She's a teenager.
Well, yeah, well, this is the question I want to ask you, because she is a teenager. She's doing all the things that teenagers like to do. She's, going to all-night parties. She's, finding her first love, her first boyfriend. And you are there for all of this. And yeah. It's, usually the things that teenagers really try to stop their parents from seeing. And aside being interested to know how on earth you stay up till 5 a.m. in the morning to take these pictures, Siân, I'm also interested on how it affects your relationship with Martha as her stepmother, to be sort of sharing these moments with her.
I think, first of all, I'm an obsessive photographer. I love taking pictures. I haven't taken pictures now for about a week because I've been making a big body of work over the summer and I'm tired. But I'm obsessive and I just love it so much. I mean, it's just extraordinary to be in my mid-40s and then find my true love. It hasn't been a man yet, but it's definitely my photography. And so it's like, it's so compelling. It's like I wake up every day and I want to be awake. It's like that. And it makes it so easy for me to do what I do. And then I have a daughter. There's a whole psychological kind of history behind her need to be witnessed by me. I'm genuinely interested in her. I'm fascinated by her. I'm fascinated by her life. And she's an extraordinary project manager. She
bosses you around.
She project manages my life and my kid, all of us. Just about to project manage a big project of mine I'm working on next year. She's extraordinary. So, there was this amazing work. There has to be working relationship because it wasn't forced. That's what comes across in the series. There's nothing forced about it. There was this like open permission and invitation. And of course, it didn't just happen. I was in her life and amongst her life. And also, I think I'm quite good fun. I'm easygoing. Her mates like me and I liked her mates. And so the invitation came from her friends as well. And, you build up relationships incrementally. So over time, I stopped being who's that in the bushes kind of thing with the camera. It's like, don't worry. Martha would say really nonchalantly, don't worry, it's all right, just my mum. And then after a while, it was like, yes, the morning after a party where they'd hit the river, it was like ringing me up saying, come down. Which is what you saw in the National Portrait Gallery. That was one of the invitations, just come down. And it was seamless.
And were there ever moments where actually you felt like you were intruding too much and had to sort of put your camera away? Or did you never have that sense throughout the making of the project?
No. And I think, never, that's because I think that's partly because I was just so driven, and I didn't know what it was driven by, but I loved it. I was driven by my heart and by my compulsion to do this piece of work, and somehow it made everything possible.
And did Martha have a say in the editing process? So in the photographs that you selected, or was that very much your remit?
No, very much mine. She wasn't interested at all.
Just in the performance?
Just in just in the performance. I think her friends, there was the picture of after the swim, and there's I think 1, 2, 3 pictures after the swim, and that was early on in the making of the work and in springtime. And there was something quite performative about that picture, unlike the rest, where they've just come out of the water and they were semi-naked, and it was late spring, it was cold. And there was something kind of very playful about that picture. I can remember they stepped out and I'd have to think very quickly. I didn't know where the image, where the work was going, but I had to think very quickly. And what was interesting about that picture, there were no boys in the picture. And then you see that whole developmental kind of movement where within 3 months, the boys appeared. It was just girls in the first year of making that work. It was very gendered. The boys were just somewhere on the periphery of their lives, and then they moved in. And it was just exquisite, just watching that whole process. And it was almost like, come on, we're in it together. And I was, they'd call me up and there would be like 5 a.m. and it would be a talky nightclub. And Martha would ring me and say, we're leaving now. And I'd jump in the car and drive half an hour at 5 a.m. in winter. And this, and just being totally on board with it. I'd be in the car loading up my camera, and then suddenly, it was outside the club, there'd be these bodies sliding down my windscreen. Because Sean's here. It's like I was here, and I was at a flask of tea with a bit of sugar in, just in case someone had overdone it. And, in that case, one of them had overdone it. So I said, you just sit here because I'm just going to do my shoot. And I put her in the car, herded them all up, harvested all the girls together. Martha was actually often on board. Martha, it was really focused. It was very intense and very, very focused. Martha, we've got 5 minutes here. And I had no lighting equipment. I was in a kebab shop. The security wanted me out. I actually had my pajamas on. I had my pajamas on. Right, and a coat. And, and that's how it was, that we worked with a particular, I'm quite intense the way I'm working. And I realize now as the responsibility of my gaze as a photographer is, I'm only getting it now, actually, how hard it is for my kids to be around me. They love me still. But there is an intensity with it. But Martha can take that.
Well, envisaging you in your pajamas does answer one question, which is why you never put yourself in the picture. Like, there's other photographers who have photographed their families, who put themselves in the frame, but you were always behind the camera. And I just wondered, was there ever a moment when you thought you would put yourself in the picture, or was that never on the agenda?
It was never ever on the agenda. And I process my world outside of myself. And what I call these transmarginal space, transpersonal spaces, these other spaces that I go to are outside of me. I mean, anyway, and I understand that. And so I'm not in it. And so probably that's why I need to give it more time to understand why. But I feel it's not, yeah. I always need to feel invisible.
Well, this is we could psychoanalyze this all day, Siân. But I would say that even though you're invisible in the images themselves, like your presence is definitely there. Like the way that Martha is returning your gaze and kind of looking so directly at you. I mean, you are almost one of the protagonists, even though you're not in the pictures themselves. And I know that the series does have this autobiographical element for you as well, and kind of exploring your own childhood and the affinities that you have with Martha's experience as well. And I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that too.
Yes, I mean, I know each of my series is really leads back to me and my history, and me trying to resolve and understand my history. And in a way, it's an extension of my psychotherapy. And so when I look at all the pictures, I just see my history unfolding, because wherever I'm shooting, wherever my camera is in that moment, leads straight back to my history. That's why I'm pressing the shutter at that time. That's what captivates me. So, every single person, when you look at their work, tells me everything about who they are, isn't it? It's like, how do you frame the world just like that in that moment? How do you just like, I'm choosing to, and this is what always fascinates me about photography, is like, wherever you place that camera, it could be like billions and billions and billions and billions of other moments, but I'm choosing to bring that moment into form. And it can only ever lead back to something that tells me about me, and something I'm trying to make sense of. But yes, I'm trying to make sense of, how it is to be here. How it is to be here. And for most of us, it's quite complicated and quite layered and deeply challenging. And so, I think I've done a huge piece of work in my formative years. And this is just, as I said, another extension of that.
Well, my last question is actually whether, having spent so much time with this group of young adults, that you as an adult proper, like, have you been able to learn anything from these girls? Have you taken any lessons from them, or things that you wish you'd known when you were a teenager?
Well, my teenage years, not surprisingly, were very painful. And what I experienced being around Martha, in a way, what I did, I lived in Brighton all my life. And then I said, let's move to my partner time. Let's move to where we are here. I want Martha to have a life swimming in the river and not hanging around in the shopping centres in Brighton. So that was my vision for Martha. And in fact, it was what I had wished for as a child. So I kind of created the perfect childhood that I never had. And her teenage years, living where we live now, were just so magical. And she allowed me to witness her magic and be part of it. So I think in terms of what I got out of it, it was deeply reparative. And really joyful. The whole making of the work was really joyful. So, unlike the work with Alice and the work with Joseph, and my current work with my older son, it's really quite difficult, but Martha wasn't. Martha was, so, it was a real gift for me that she gave me. To be amongst her world and her friends, to do that book launch. When we had the book launch for Looking for Alice, it was horrific night on the boat in Paris for Paris Photo, and it was the night of the Paris attacks, and somehow it reflected back to me the deep traumatization of people, of these children, and difference. And with Martha, I had no expectations of that opening of the book, but I had all her friends there. They stuck a sound system on, and it was just great. It was so uplifting. So actually that was the gift.
Well, I think you definitely get a sense of the joy and the magic in the images, for sure. And I hope that everybody watching here today can spend some time with the images and get to know them a bit better. But for now, thank you so much, Siân, and thank you to Richard Saltoun for organising this. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you.